Why don't you want Scotland to keep the pound if they vote to go independent next year?
Well, it's not a question of that. Alex Salmond is saying that if we were to become independent, he would seek to enter into a currency union. If that's going to happen, two things are necessary. Both sides need to agree in principle, then they would. And secondly, they'd have to agree terms and conditions.
Yes.
And as I've pointed out repeatedly, that if you have a currency union, what you can't have are two parts of it going in opposite economic directions. I mean, that's you can see that in the Eurozone.
Right.
So whatever else it is, that's not independence.
But that's not the answer to the question. Why don't you want it to happen? I see what you're saying, that there's no guarantee, that that you've got to get agreement on both sides. But what is your objection when Alex Salmond and the SNP clearly say it's in the best interests for everybody, and they lay out some fairly strong evidence in terms of Scotland being the second biggest exporter market for the rest of the UK, exports of oil, gas and whisky? Why don't you want a currency union?
Because I want to keep what we've got at the moment, where we have a common currency throughout the whole of the United Kingdom. We have an economy of 60 million people, rather than in Scotland's case some 5 million people, and I cannot for the life of me see the benefit of breaking that up, of going into an arrangement which would depend on two what would then be foreign countries actually agreeing in principle. And remember, part of this is that each country would have to agree each other's tax, spending and borrowing, so there's a democratic issue there. But on a practical level, if you honestly believe that the rest of the UK has been holding Scotland back, why would you want to enter into a legal straitjacket that would give the very same rest of the UK a veto over what you did?
Yes.
And if you look at the document published today, they have told us absolutely nothing new. They carry on asserting that this would happen because they say it would be the best thing to happen. What they don't have is a plan B if it doesn't work out or the terms and conditions aren't acceptable.
And we'll put that to John Swinney later in the programme. But how would the rest of the UK be worse off if we did enter into a currency union?
Well, the point of the currency union is, firstly, you would have to get the rest of the UK, and nobody has asked the rest of the UK whether or not it would agree to a union that would mean potentially the other partner could veto what it chose to tax and spend and borrow. That's how the Eurozone operates. That's a currency union for you. And equally, people in Scotland, having voted for independence, would find they were then in an economic straitjacket where the rest of the UK could potentially veto them on their tax rates, for example. Now, I just don't think that's a very satisfactory arrangement, especially when you ask yourself, what is all this for? We have the pound, which operates throughout the entire United Kingdom. We have a single market in a way that doesn't exist in Europe. There are no barriers, tax, regulatory or anything else, which is a tremendous help to most Scottish firms, most of which what they produce and make is sold south of the border. Why would you want to break that up? The nationalist answer is, oh, we'll have lower corporation taxes. Well, no, you wouldn't, because the currency union would stop you going off in a different economic direction. You can't operate a single currency if one country is spending lots and lots of money and the other one is not.
If, though, there is a vote for independence, and I take many of the journalists' point this morning that actually this document does rather assume a lot of things will just happen automatically, and as you've said, they haven't got they haven't set out a plan B if currency union doesn't happen. But won't it be incumbent on you, we get to that date, the vote for independence, let's say, it'll be incumbent on you, if the majority of people in Scotland have voted for independence, to make a currency union work, because they will have voted in favour of that too.
Yeah, well, remember, I'm Scottish here.
I do remember. I will never forget.
I get that vote too. Look, everybody has been clear that from the moment the referendum was agreed, that we would abide by the outcome. There is no question whatsoever about that. However, nobody agreed that what was in the white paper published today would have to be implemented in its entirety.
Right, wouldn't it be incumbent on you to do so, though, to make it work?
Look, what we agreed, and what everybody's agreed north and south of the border, is we'll abide by the result. So even if the nationalists won by one vote, that's it. There's no going back.
All right.
But in relation to how could people possibly agree to a white paper that wasn't written at the time of this agreement and had no idea what was in it? And remember, the nationalist position on the currency has changed 3 or 4 times in the last 2 years. They used to be in favour of the euro. Then they wanted to be like Panama uses the US dollar. So all of these things would be subject to negotiation. And then, of course, never mind the UK, what about Europe?
Yes, well, we'll come absolutely, and we will talk about that with John Swinney. Let's talk about the Barnett formula and funding for different parts of the UK. Do you think the Barnett formula should be scrapped?
No, and it's, I think the Prime Minister said yesterday that he didn't think it was on the agenda either.
Well, although Alistair Carmichael did hint about it on the Sunday Politics a few days ago, that actually, if Scotland votes no to independence, they may be voting for a cut in their funding from Westminster in the future.
Well, look, if we were independent, then clearly the Barnett formula wouldn't apply,
Sure.
because it's something that applies for the existing United Kingdom.
Yes.
If we decide that we're going on our own separate way, then everything changes.
Yes, but if they vote no to independence, that's what I'm saying. If they vote no to independence, is there risk then for Scotland that they would face a cut in their funding from Westminster, which would seriously harm their prospects of keeping public spending high?
I don't think so. I mean, this Barnett formula has been there for 30 years. Successive governments of all political colours have looked at it and come to the view that however it works, that they're not planning to change it. So I think the issue that we have got to face in Scotland next September is whether or not we want to swap the certainty that comes from that with the fact that we would be dependent for 20% of our tax revenues on North Sea oil, which of course, is doing well at the moment, largely because of a massive UK subsidy on decommissioning, but everybody knows it's declining at precisely the same time as the cost of meeting an ageing population starts to rise. So, look, the issues are very clear. What I would say about this white paper is there is nothing in it today that we didn't know yesterday. They've ducked all these big questions on currency, on Europe, on welfare, you name it. There's nothing new here.
Except the SNP, of course, talk about having their hands on the levers if Scotland is independent, that all the priorities will be a Scottish government's to do what they want, to improve the lot of Scots. They say your campaign is one of fear. One of scaring, one of saying you must stick with what you know, you must stick with certainty instead of aspiring for something better. Why don't you publish a similar document to this one, laying out the positive benefits of Scotland remaining in the UK?
Let me deal with the many charges you laid before me. Firstly, it's them that's putting forward a proposition that we should leave the UK. We are entitled to ask some hard questions. Remember, we asked them, where's this legal opinion that said you'd automatically get back into the European Union? It didn't exist. They actually told us something which they must have known was simply not true. And they say that's being negative. Well, of course they would say that, wouldn't they? In relation to, if you look at one of the policies that they've announced today, they want to have more free childcare. Yes. Great. They could do that today. Childcare and the provision of it is totally devolved. Do you know what they said? Nicola Sturgeon said when she was asked why they didn't do it? She said, people would go to work and pay taxes. Their taxes would go to the revenue, our revenue, not a foreign country's revenue. So, there is a very powerful positive case for us being better and stronger in part of the UK. The onus is on them to make their case, and they have failed miserably. We have not got any of the answers we were led to expect today, despite the fact they've spent an awful lot of taxpayers' money trying to produce it.